Good afternoon, dear students. We meet again now for the fourth time. I hope you have all been doing well and had at least some opportunity to view our previous three classes. We started with some introductory uh, classes on philosophy, and then we tied it to some of the metaphysics of education. And the third class, which I sent out last Sunday, was actually starting the core of our curriculum, which is to do with the seven philosophies of education. The first one we dealt with last Sunday, that was idealism. So today we will be studying naturalism, the second of the philosophies. But before that, I would like to spend time with you discussing Brother Ajahn Tommy once again, who has given me two questions to ponder about. I would like you to just exercise your minds and to see how we can understand these things better. Now, it's only a perceptive student who is keen about learning and is serious about his work that asks questions. And I appreciate Brother Ajahn Tommy, and I invite more of you to do that, to come to me with your questions. And as I always say, I do not know all the answers. I have to admit that I myself am a seeker, a student, and so all I can assure you is that I'll do my best to address your questions and share with you my understanding. So here are Brother Ajahn Tommy's two questions. First of all, he says that idealism does not start in the 16th century, as I had put it across. He says it goes way back to the days of Plato, because he was very impressed with the statement by William Hawking, who said, idealism is better understood by the terminology ideaism. And he says, if that is true, if it is ideaism we're talking about, then we should go to Plato. And he is so right. In fact, it was the great American philosopher, I think it was, what was his name? Uh, Philosopher, I forget his name, who said, all Western philosophy is a footnote to Plato. I think it was Whitehead, yeah. Alfred North Whitehead, he said, all Western philosophy is merely a footnote to Plato. So Plato has been instrumental in giving us most of the bulk of the philosophical thoughts, and he captured it from the Greek antiquity, from a place called Miletus, where philosophy actually started off from, the questioning process, and with Socrates and all the debating teams and dialoguing teams that they had at that time. So Brother Ajahn Tommy is right. I mean, idea. If you extrapolate the term ideaism, it certainly goes back to Plato. So I can't disagree with him there. So idealism would ideally start with Plato and not with Kant and Berkeley and Shankaracharya, as I put it. So I can't disagree with him there. Second thing, he says that Kant talks about the primacy of reason, and he wants divinity also to be included. And he is absolutely right. Because in Kant's understanding, all reality and all knowledge starts off with the structure of rationality of the human mind, and so there is little room for the actual divinity. In fact, if you remember, Kant talks about postulating God, about creating and assuming that there is a God. So he doesn't really admit that there is God Almighty, or there is a historical God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Jesus Christ. But he says that we ought to assume that there is a God, and that is required for the right moral life. So Brother Ajahn Tommy is right. He says that Kant can't be right. Kant is not very right in that. We have to include and leave room for divinity. And again, I have to agree with him, but I would like to say that this is the philosophy of idealism, and we will, in the 5th class, see the philosophy of Thomistic realism, where this very idea is strongly emphasized. So Brother Ajahn Tommy's thinking is going ahead by 2 classes, and we will see what he means by in Thomistic realism the next class, after the 4th class which we have today. So here we are. We will be looking at the philosophy of naturalism. Let's see what it says. Yeah, here we go. We have it here. Okay. So, as we started the process last class, we were looking at 3 dimensions of assumptions of each of these 7 philosophies. These were the metaphysical assumptions, the epistemological assumptions, and the axiological assumptions. The metaphysical assumptions are assumptions about reality. Epistemological assumptions are assumptions about knowledge, and axiological assumptions are assumptions about the value forming aspect, the aesthetic aspect, the ethical aspect of student life. So each of these philosophies, we started with idealism, today we start with naturalism, will be evaluated and studied from the point of view of their assumptions and see how good they are. Then we will look at their strengths and weaknesses. Each of these philosophies have got some emphasis, and they have become philosophies because they appeal to some people strongly. But then every philosophy has got some good points and some not so good points. So we shall see how we can evaluate the pluses and minuses of each philosophy. So this is naturalism. Let's see what it says. The metaphysical assumptions of naturalism. First of all, nature alone is real, and all reality is physical. So nature is very important for naturalism. And all physical elements, you know, the periodic table, starting with hydrogen, helium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, neon, all these things we studied in our 8th standard, 9th standard periodic table. Those are the elements. And naturalism says that the nature alone is real. The material aspect of the person alone is real. The mind is not for much. It is radically opposed to the philosophy of idealism, which is more about the human spirit. The idealism, if you remember, emphasizes the spirit of the human person and very much less the material aspect. And here it is the exact opposite. We emphasize the material aspect and discount the spiritual aspect of the human person. There are no non-material or spiritual entities according to naturalism. So there are no entities like angels, no spirits, no beings without body, and God is not there according to naturalism. No God or supreme being. The human is a complex physical organism, a product of the universe. So as we said, the elements elements determine everything that is human, and everything that you see, feel, touch, taste, smell, those are what is real. Says the mind is the product of the brain processes. Now here we have two important words, the mind and the brain. What is the difference? The mind is a little bit of a mysterious entity. It cannot be touched. It cannot be seen. It cannot be empirically verified. But the brain is a physical, biochemical organism. So the brain is something that it can be studied because it is a material entity, unlike the mind, which is a spiritual entity. So here it says the mind itself is a product of brain processes according to naturalism. Human achievement and values are ultimate. Naturalism gives a lot of importance to the human aspect. What we see, the human value, the value of human person is very strongly emphasized in naturalism. Then, death means personal extinction. There is no eternity to look forward to. Now, we all as Christians, we have always a hope that after death there is eternal life. But naturalism says no, there's no such thing as eternity, there's only time, and death means you are going to be extinct. After death, there is no life, you're going to be extinct. Then, Francis Bacon, the man from England in the 16th century, 17th century, 1600s, proposed a reorientation of all knowledge to gain man's mastery over nature after the fall of Adam. This was very probably the beginning of the strong tradition of naturalism. Francis Bacon, who said man's mastery over nature, that is what starts naturalism. Okay, not spiritual entity. Now, if you remember, way before the 16th or even the Reformation, Europe and the entire known world at that time was very conscious religiously. Public consciousness of religion was very high and strong. Whereas after when this was going on, there was a lot of unnecessary strife and rivalry, and unfortunately, there was a lot of bitterness among people. So many of these intellectuals thought that that is unnecessary. Let's distance ourselves away from religion. And that is why all these philosophies have come in, and naturalism is one of them. So natural thought rather than supernatural thought became fashionable. David Hume, Charles Darwin, Ernest Nagel, Richard Dawkins, and many others, Carl Sagan, they're all the notable philosophers who emphasized and were vouching for this philosophy. So this was Carl Sagan, the American astronomer, and then this is Ernest Nagel, the American philosopher, and we have, they all come together in what Carl Sagan said very profoundly for them. He said, the cosmos is all that there was, all that there is, and all that there will be. It's a very, very strong statement he makes. He completely displaces God from the creation aspect. What does he do? Let's look at the book of Isaiah. In Isaiah, we see that God says that I have numbered the stars and I have called them by name. The sun, the moon, stars, the entire cosmos is a creation of our God. But Carl Sagan here says the opposite. There is no God, there is only the cosmos, and that is all that there ever was, all that there is ever now, and all that ever will be. So he takes a very strong stand against religion and calls it naturalism. And all these naturalistic philosophers agree with Carl Sagan and come together around this statement. Then we have naturalism operates through cause-effect phenomena. We know even in our daily human life, we as human beings tend to give reasons for why something happened. We analyze the events before, present, after, and so on. We try to link a series of cause and effect relationships. And then we say, this happened because of this thing. That is the cause-effect determinism. This is typically the naturalistic philosopher's weapon. So, naturalism favors strong determinism, a state that is determined by prior states. So, what has happened before has directly got a bearing on what has happened now, and this will have a direct bearing on what is happening in the future. It is all cause and effect, linear relationship. Okay, then there is little room for human free will, isn't it? Under such a situation, if everything is cause and effect, then there is a cause for everything, and it will create an effect somewhere or the other. Therefore, there is very little room for human free will. Where is the room for human free will? There is very little room for human free will. Evolutionary processes explain change and the development of the universe. Now, you know that scientific philosopher called Charles Darwin brought about the laws of evolution, and he says creation has evolved through evolutionary processes and laws. No ultimate purpose or telos in the universe. What is telos? Telos is a Greek word which means the ultimate aim. So, naturalism would say that there is no ultimate aim or no ultimate aim in the universe. It is all simply meaningless. This is Jacques Monod. Three of these philosophers, Jacques Monod, Ernest Nagel, and Julian Huxley. Jacques Monod says, universe is a game of pure chance. Pure chance. There is no rhyme or reason, no logic behind it. It's just chance. Just throw the dice. Ernest Nagel says, human destiny is an episode between two oblivions. No end, no beginning. Start, it just comes and goes. Just comes and goes, and the human is ultimately dependent on subhuman physical properties. So subhuman physical properties is all the chemical elements like carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, neon. These elements is all that determines the human person, according to Ernest Nagel. Julian Huxley identifies conceptual thought, speech, and possession of cumulative tradition, yet denies that man has any transcendental powers above the forces of nature. Now, if what Ernest Nagel says is true, then what about things like language, which is a human invention and a mental capacity, or tradition, or speech, or cumulative understanding in community, and things like that. So Julian Huxley says, yes, that is all there, but there is no transcendental dimension to human being. No dimension beyond the strictly terrestrial. The strictly terrestrial in the universe, there is nothing beyond that is strictly seen and empirically felt. There is nothing beyond. The epistemological assumptions of naturalism. Now we'll come to the area of knowledge. All knowledge is through empirical faculties. You know what are our sense faculties? Our sense faculties are 5 sense faculties, or the Panchendriyam, as we call them in India. Panchendriyam, that is the eyes, the nose, the tongue, the skin, and the audition, the ears. These are the Panchendriyam, and these are the 5 empirical faculties. So all knowledge that comes into the human mind is only through the Panchendriyam, is only through those 5 faculties. John Locke brought about the famous idea of tabula rasa. He says it's a blank slate. Tabula rasa means blank slate. You see these little children in UKG and the kindergarten classes, they have a slate, a wooden slate, and they've got a chalk piece and they write on that chalk piece. So John Locke says that the human mind is a blank slate and it is written on by the senses. That is John Locke's philosophy. And Thomas Aquinas says something similar earlier in the 13th century. He says, nihil est in intellectu quod non erat in sensu, meaning there is nothing in the intellect that is not before in the senses. He reflects the same thing, but let me caution you, Thomas Aquinas is not a naturalist. He's not a naturalist. Although he does say this, he is not classified or understood as a naturalist. He strongly, as we know, he's a Dominican priest, he strongly believes in God. Nagel and other naturalists held the empirical sciences paramount because their methods of observation, measurement, analysis, and testing were so sophisticated and powerful. What does it say here? The scientific method, which has got observation, measurement, analysis, and testing. These are the methods of science. With these methods, science has taken the preeminent place in epistemology, in knowledge, and says these methods are so powerful and sophisticated that we are the rulers of knowledge world. Okay, and Nagel and other naturalists allow that. The goal of the empirical method is to discover repeating patterns in nature and to codify them as generalizations of scientific laws. Okay, so the empirical method is very strong in science, and the goal there is to discover in nature the repeating patterns. Okay, and then to codify them as scientific laws. Okay, they make generalizations and then they codify them as laws. Science has an imperial status. Religion and ethics are totally discredited because they do not hold up to empirical repeatability and proof. So here comes a situation where science was king. You remember in the 17th and 18th century, we had all kinds of inventions and discoveries and all kinds of theories coming out from science. And at that time, religion and philosophy and ethics and all these disciplines, metaphysics, etc., took a bottom rung of the ladder. Okay, why? Because disciplines like religion and philosophy do not allow themselves to be understood through repeatability or empirical testing. Empirical testing is not suitable for discipline, for a discipline like philosophy or religion. It is only suitable for science. And therefore, because that was ruling, because science was ruling and the empirical method was ruling, the importance of philosophy, the importance of religion, the importance of ethics, etc., came down very much. The axiological assumptions or the value-forming assumptions of naturalism, let's see what they are. All values are relative. There is no universal truth or norms. We remember we had discussed this question. Brother Arjun had asked me very perceptively a question in the previous class, and I alluded to this aspect of relativism. There are some philosophers who give in to relativism, and this naturalism is one such philosophy which says that there are no universal or absolute truths or norms. They are all the norms, all the values are relative. Values are devised by society for orderly and stable communal life. They are instilled in us by conditioning. What is conditioning? What is instilled? Instilled is we get inculcated into, we interiorize these values by conditioning. How do we get conditioned? Look at the child who is in the family, young child, about 6 years of age. He gets up in the morning. Mother says, "Get up in the morning at 6 o'clock, brush your teeth, and take a bath, dress yourself, have breakfast, go to school." It's all conditioning. It's conditioning at that age. So the assumption of naturalists is that all values are inculcated by that kind of conditioning. Nagel proposes that these values should be interpreted as hypotheses for efficiently managing individual and communal interests. Okay, so these values need to be managed to understood as hypothesis. Hypothesis means they are tentative. That means you come with some values, some systems, and you do trial and error. You do trial and error, and then you see whether it suits you, you accept them. If it doesn't suit you, you discard them. That is the method in which they internalize these values. These hypotheses are tested in the life experiences of a group and modified as needed. So they are revisable. Sometimes they are discarded. Sometimes they are accepted. Peter Singer says that balancing and maximizing of competing interests forms the basis of a naturalistic conception of ethics, which is utilitarian. What does this mean? Now, it says ethics are to be useful to man. Only those things which are helpful in utility of man are to be accepted as ethics. And in this aspect, you are constantly balancing between what is useful and what is not so useful. So it's a maximization of utility that Peter Singer, the American philosopher, talks about. Okay, so then we have here naturalism's interaction with theology. What does it say? Naturalism rejects the existence of God outright. Absolutely, one stroke. Naturalism says there is no God. Nagel, who calls himself a humanist, identifies disciplined reason as the only instrument available for progress. Okay, disciplined reason. This is what Nagel identifies. Says the only thing we don't need faith, we don't need hope, we don't need love. We only need disciplined reason, and that is the instrument which will help us to make all the progress we want to make. Secular humanism declares total autonomy and self-reliance in a non-theistic universe. So there is no God, and you are totally independent, and you are totally autonomous. Autonomous means independent in a self-reliant world. Just like biblical moral code, the secular humanists have a humanist manifesto which declares. See, the naturalists have come together as secular humanists, and they have got, just like the Ten Commandments, the humanist manifesto. What does it say? It says something like this: we affirm that moral values derive their source from human experience. Ethics is autonomous and situational, needing no theological or ideological sanction. Ethics stems from human need and interest. To deny this distorts the whole basis of life. Human life has meaning because we can create and develop our futures. Happiness and creative realization of human needs and desires individually and in shared enjoyment, are continuous themes of humanism. Look at this statement. What do you understand? Basically, it says, you don't need God for happiness. You don't need God for ethics. You don't need values. Everything is in the human world, and as long as human welfare is taken care of, that's all that matters. Okay? And we as human beings should have the freedom and the right to determine all our aspects. We don't need any ideological or theological sanctions. There is nobody need to tell us this is what the Bible says or this is what the scripture says. No, we don't want any authority to tell us all these things. We will understand these things ourselves by trial and error and by observation. This is what humanist says. It is a very strong philosophy, which is very unfortunate for us. Anyway, humane acts like compassion, sympathy, sincerity, fairness, tolerance, and kindness can be practiced without any reference to God, simply exercising reason according to naturalists. So look at this profound statement here, which we don't agree with. I don't agree with. It says, you don't need God to be sympathetic. You don't need God to be compassionate. You don't need God to be sincere. You don't need God to be fair. You don't need God to be tolerant or to be kind. For none of these things you need God. This is what they say. Very, very difficult for us to accept. But let them say, and this is what they are bringing forward. And only thing you need is simply good reason. This implies that if ethical traits are anchored in the natural world, impersonal nature is the sole ground of all value. But they give one important thing. They make one thing the basic reference point, and that is nature. Naturalists hold that the aim of education is to produce people who understand the realities of the material world. This is some of the educational implications of naturalism. Okay, so the aim of education is to produce people, to train and develop people who understand the realities of the material world, not the spiritual world. Students need to learn how to exercise rational control over their environment and to develop their capacities as natural agents. Students should be only terrestrially focused. There is no need to teach them about God. This is what naturalists say. Such education produces people who lead orderly lives, systematic lives, draw good, valid, accurate conclusions from observations of nature and human affairs. Okay, so as people, they are very systematic in their outlook. They are very careful. They measure, they rationalize, they come to conclusions by the exercise of the mind. Science, the chief method of dealing with the physical world, is employed in formulating instructional procedures for all education. So science is the paramount epistemological entity, and it basically sets the tone for all education. Education implications of naturalism. So we have here the cosmos. You see on the right side the image of the Milky Way, and says here, the basic ideas of the cosmos are most clearly explained in the fields of physics, chemistry, biology, astronomy, the empirical sciences. Okay? Other subjects such as literature, philosophy, and art cannot be part of the curriculum as they are devoid of hard facts. However, they can be in the curriculum through statistical generalizations. So this is a very, very interesting thing. This implication for education says hard subjects like mathematics chemistry, biology, astronomy, all these subjects are valid subjects. Whereas subjects like literature or philosophy or art or ethics, these kind of subjects are of no value. This is what naturalists say. It recommends hands-on activity, field trips, lab experiments, and audiovisual aids which employ senses as methodologically preferred. Now, remember in the previous class we spoke about idealism. Idealism says the exact opposite of this. Idealism says we need theory, more and more theory, and less of practical aspect. But here they say no, you need practical aspect, you need hands-on activity, you need field trips, you need experiments, you need audiovisual aids, and so on and so forth. Unlike the idealist teacher who acts as the model, the naturalistic teacher gets out of the way and acts only as a channel for the student to contact the material world. Now, remember we said in the last class that the idealist teacher uses examples, heroes and heroines from society to inculcate, and the idealist teacher himself is a role model. Following that role model, the students learn things. But here in naturalism, it's exactly the opposite. It says the teacher should remove himself from the classroom, so to say, and let the student meet the natural material world and discover things for himself. See the perspective. See the perspective which is very different between idealism and naturalism. B.F. Skinner, the Harvard psychologist, who says he rejected the immaterial mind because it lacks observable empirical dimensions. The only thing observable is human behavior. Now, mind, does anybody know or see the mind? Has anybody seen the mind? B.F. Skinner took this as an excuse. He's a Harvard psychologist. He took this as an excuse to say that the mind doesn't exist, only the brain exists. Okay, so then how do we evaluate human behavior? How do we do that? Let's see what Skinner says. Skinner recommends that education be based on the technology of behavior. You can observe people's behavior. You cannot observe people's minds, but you can observe their external behavior. So, the technology of behavior should help us to understand the human person, says B.F. Skinner. But then, how does one account for the interior life? Remember that. Much in the human life is unmeasurable and undocumentable. The interior life, which is within you, is there any empirical evidence for that? It is nevertheless there. It is reality. It is, you cannot deny it. It is there, but it cannot be documented. So, what B.F. Skinner seems to have a problem here. Naturalists are divided on the axiological implications in education. Some, like Skinner, say that there are no moral norms, while others say that important lessons can be drawn from nature, such as compassion from the behavior of the mother robin looking after young robins, or patience from the long gestational period in mammals. So it says, what naturalists are saying here is that to understand human feelings and human behavior, just look at nature. For example, if you want to teach patience to a student, look at how the mother robin, robin is a bird, how the mother robin looks after and feeds the baby robins. Look at the long gestational period. Gestation period is the time when the young one is formed in the mother's womb, and the mammal takes about 6 months or 1 year or even more, some mammals, to take time to give birth. So he says, by looking at this, you can understand the importance of patience. Looking at nature, you can study, you can learn the virtue, the human virtue of patience. That's what naturalists say. Similarly, studying the complexity of the material world and discovering the economy of its processes teaches important moral lessons. So, nature has got many processes, for example, growth, birth, decay, reformation, and repair. All these things are natural processes. And there is great economy in nature. There's a lot to be learned from nature. So, naturalists say, this is enough. This is enough for us to learn from nature. All that we want to learn, we can learn from nature. And that's enough for us. Naturalistic moral education advances the utilitarian perspective that ethical decisions should be based on the greatest good for the greatest number. This is a typical formula they use in democracy to take decisions for the greatest good of the greatest number. If that happens, greatest number means number of people. If the greatest good for the greatest number happens, you have a valid decision. So naturalists say moral education can have the utilitarian perspective by having the greatest good for the greatest number. This utilitarian perspective makes deciding on ethical matters a purely factual, even a statistical procedure. It's just mathematics. Just pure statistical, big data today mathematics. It believes there is no need to introduce ideas of virtue and unchanging norms. There's no need for authority of the scripture. There is no need for eternal values. All we need to look at is society and empiricism and nature and things like that. Ultimately, naturalist moral education is simply concerned with results and practical human behavior. Moral reasoning based on absolute norms are rejected. There is no need to justify moral behavior by a scale of absolute values. We only need to pay heed to society in general, if society in general approves them. So people are the judge here, not scripture, not any idealist thinking, not any sacrosanct eternal principle. It is people who decide things. Naturalists recommend direct sensory involvement in the arts, whereas idealists favor an abstract intellectual appreciation of it. We saw this last time. Says the idealist says that art is an intellectual thing, whereas naturalist says no. You touch it, you feel it, you taste it, you are empirically exposed to art. So art involves direct sensory involvement rather than the abstract intellectual understanding of the proportions and integrity of art. Let's look at the strengths and weaknesses. Some of the strengths. It rightly endorses the scientific method as an important rational method for solving problems. We must give some credit to naturalists. They say that they endorse, that means they accept the scientific method as an important rational method for solving problems. It faces the hard facts of the universe, including our struggle for survival in it, with courage and determination. It is based on the human will, so human power, so human courage, human determination. It faces all the hard facts and problems of the universe by struggle and human will. This is a good thing about naturalism. There is a positive confidence among naturalists that creative intelligence can actually improve our world. So naturalists believe that the intelligence can really improve our world. There's a way to solve our problems through intelligence, etc. It employs data-driven studies and promotes objective analysis to find solutions to problems based on hard evidence. Data-driven studies. Now, you know, in the time of COVID, we have seen so many graphs coming out in the world, on the internet and on the cell phone. You see all these graphs, bar graphs and line graphs and scatter diagrams and all kinds of things. These are all expressive of data-driven studies. What is the data, and how do we study a problem by looking at data? These naturalism involves and employs data-driven studies and promotes objective analysis to find solutions to problems based on hard evidence. Some of the weaknesses: naturalism does not adequately explain certain aspects of reality we experience, those aspects that do not have a non-physical and non-material quality. I told you, when you think about the interior life, is naturalism able to understand it? No, because it works on the principle of empiricism. It works on the principle of measurement, of observation, of analysis, of testing, and therefore it cannot measure what is going on inside the human mind. Admittedly, the naturalist view that the physical world is real and does not depend on the mind is the correction of the idealist position, but naturalists go to the other extreme and disregard the mind's reality altogether. Now, we saw two important philosophies between naturalism and idealism. Idealism says humanity is pure spirit, so it is only the mind. Whereas naturalism is opposite. It's not the mind, it's the matter. So it gives importance to the human world. Naturalism gives importance to the human world, but it goes to the very other extreme and says the human spirit is not of any value. So this is the other extreme. Idealism was one extreme, naturalism is the other extreme. There is a strong determinism built into naturalism, taking cause-effect as primary. Human choices are subject to brute, impersonal nature. Therefore, humans are not significantly free. So, if there is cause-effect relationship everywhere, if there is cause-effect relationship everywhere, and everything is determinism, where is the room for human will? That is a weakness in naturalism. C.S. Lewis, a prominent Protestant philosopher, Christian philosopher, says that he identifies an irony, that means a contradiction within naturalism. If naturalism is true, then the belief that it is true cannot be rationally held, because the view that it is true is forced rather than free. Now, we know that naturalism believes in cause-effect relationship. Now, if it believes in cause-effect relationship, then how can you have a free belief of naturalism? Because then it will be forced, right? So therefore, it says naturalism is speaking against itself. There's a self-contradictory problem with naturalism when it talks about cause-effect relationship as well as its own belief in natural things. Marxists, who are strong naturalists, attribute all events to historical and economic causes. Naturalists are impoverished when it comes to axiology. Their claim that everything is relative, that there are no universal moral values, and that human welfare needs to be maximized, poses a great problem for moral reasoning. While rejecting that there are no values, it assumes one for itself. The human welfare ought to be maximized at all costs. So here's another self-contradiction within naturalism. Naturalism says that there is no there are no values, there are no eternal principles. but it assumes one value for itself, and that is the human welfare ought to be maximized at all costs. So it says yes and no at the same time. Nagel's claim that empirical validation is the sole method of gaining knowledge is unrealistic. Different fields like metaphysics and theology have their own way of gaining and transmitting knowledge. So Nagel, a strong philosopher of naturalism, says that empirical validation is the only method available in epistemology to evaluate the truth. But that is not acceptable, because there are other disciplines which don't lend themselves to metaphysics or theology, like metaphysics or theology, which don't lend themselves to empirical methods, and they cannot be subject or judged by empirical methods. And we have naturalists unduly rely on conditioning and socialization techniques. Skinner identifies similarities between human and animal responses and holds that they can be guided and controlled in the same way. So Skinner makes an astounding statement. He says, just like conditioning dogs or animals, you can condition human beings. And that's a very dangerous thing to do. Why? Because conditioning may be appropriate for children in the younger years. As I said, get up in the morning, brush your teeth, take your bath, have your breakfast, run to school, come back. This is conditioning for a child of 6 or 8 years of age. But if it is used for mature students, it tends to be manipulative and can damage the capacity for self-direction, reducing the student's ability to act on the basis of internalized principles and proper motivation. So if in my age, if somebody tries to condition me, I'm not going to accept it. Or a student at the age of 20, if he's going to be conditioned by a mother, then his ability for self-direction, his ability to decide for himself, his ability to act on the basis of self-evaluated principles comes down, and that can affect his direction in life altogether. Naturalism invalidates all Christian claims of a God, a non-empirical reality, as well as the ability of scripture and tradition to communicate theological truth, which is not always obtained by empirical means. So this is another weakness of naturalism. And we have here, finally, naturalism cannot countenance any transcendent image of God and vehemently opposes the orthodox Christian belief that man is created imago Dei. We are created in the image of God. Naturalism cannot accept that. This is a very big problem between theists and naturalists. So that's what it is, my dear students. I hope I've been able to help you understand some of the nitty-gritties of naturalism. Please do note down your questions and see if I can, I'll see if I can help you. I'll see if I can help you with the answers. I enjoyed speaking to you. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Have a good weekend and a wonderful week. I look forward to looking at speaking to you next week. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Bye.